Any game designers in the room? Okay, great. And the rest of you, are you developers? If you're a coder or a developer, could you put your hand up? Okay. And are the rest of you business development people or commercial people? So there's a lot of people who I'm not sure exactly what you do, but there's a few developers and designers here. So I'll try and focus on the design side. The clicker's not working, so I'm going to pop up the stage occasionally. So, I think this is the conference where we all understand that there's a type of game called social, and there's a type of game which is casual. Being formerly from various companies, but including Sony, where I worked on PlayStation Home, there's also a difference between what happens in mobile and what happens in the console space. So I'm lucky. I've done both sides, as well as in the old days, online PC games, things like Quake. So, social games is the area of growth right now. And we've heard of the big topical games companies who on the Facebook world are making lots of money. And there's lots of questions on how long that will last and whether that's a bubble. But today I'm just going to try and focus on what will make your games more effective as social games to generate more revenue. Now this slide is actually out of date. Last month, when I submitted this over, we had 25 million users in Papaya. It's actually now 32 million users. We're growing very fast. But I didn't want to just talk about who Papaya are. I think you'll understand who we are as we go through. But this slide should at least give you a sense of who Papaya Mobile are. And if you want to learn more, just ask me. A key question that people who haven't done social games before ask is Cityville, is Farmville, are any of those games really games? And is there an inevitable consequence that making your game social will make your game less of a game? And I don't think that's the case. I think we all can learn from the benefits of making our game social. Whether you're making a first-person shooter or a solitaire-style card game, by adding social elements, we can make that game more interesting and more valuable to our user. And if it's more valuable to our user, they will spend more money with us. So, what do I mean by social? There's plenty of people in this room who understand what a social game is at least as well as I do. So that's my definition. Argue, question, however you like, but I won't dwell on it. So I'm going to go into my tips. You can't quite see the English, but that's supposed to say social games are compelling as brands. What does that mean? That means we have to change the way we think about the content we create. We're not just making a game. It's not just a one-time experience. If you're going to make social games work, you have to be able to encourage the player to come back time and time and time and time again. And that's why the freemium model is so useful with a social game. Because if you can monetize their return time and time and time again, you will end up with better revenue than if you had created a barrier to them buying your game by charging for it up front. So it also means you have to manage your game as a service. So it's not just put the game out and leave it. It's about making sure that you go back to the game and update it and refresh it and make the users love and enjoy that game because it grows with them. So tip 2. Tip 2 is actually going back to basics. We have players of our games, and they're different. They have different desires and wants and needs out of their gameplay experience. So think about who they are. There's a great guy called Richard Bartle who had some really interesting analysis because of the game he created called Mud. Well, he co-created Mud. Mud is one of the first experiences that had shared online multiplayer, and it was a text-based adventure. I'm one of those guys who played it on my Apple IIe back in '85 or something ridiculous with my coupler modem. If anyone knows what a coupler modem in this room is, then I'll buy you a beer later. But anyway, my point is, what he identified still applies. The different players have different reasons for playing. If I am a collector, I'm going to go out and enjoy the fact that I complete the collections available to me. And that's not the same type of behavior as if I'm an explorer, where I want to just try every space, but I don't have to try everything in that space. I want new, fresh experiences. If I'm a socializer, that again is a very different behavior because my experience is benefited because you're there, or you're there. Not just because there's a sword of doom I can pick up, but because the other people I talk to. And the fourth type he talked about, Richard Bartle, was killer. They're the people who love to destroy other people's experience. They're great. They sound terrible, and they are, but actually they're an important group that you have to appreciate are in your game if you're playing social experiences. But actually, there's a really interesting thing, is that you can redirect their behavior and make them look at that differently. And that's where competitive play becomes really important. So when you think about your game, right at the outset, don't forget who's going to play it and why they're going to enjoy it. It can also help you if you come across a game that you're not making much money out of, sit back again and rethink why someone should play your game and what they will get out of playing it. And if you think about the behavior types, the rewards that they want to get, you're going to be more successful. Another thing is that the freemium model isn't always understood by people. People think that 90% of your audience are getting a free game. How dare they? No. Those 90% are investing their incredibly valuable time on your brand. And they are your marketing channel to get the 10% of people who are willing to spend money on your game. If they don't exist, those people who will spend money will not spend money on your game. And you could argue the reason why premium must be better is because you get everybody paying. No, what happens is you don't even see the people who would never have spent money on your game. And just think about the wasted opportunity you've just thrown away because you gave them a key they had to pay for at the door, rather than inviting them into your pub and letting them buy their drinks. So, I should also add, this 110-1 rule is very standard, very kind of generic. However, on our platform, we've actually seen a lot better than that. A game called X City, which we launched, was getting 16% of its audience converting from playing to paying, and about 4% of its audience spending more than $100 each. And we do that on a monthly basis, by the way. So, anyway, so don't forget that there is no such thing as a free lunch. Those people are spending their time on you. So, tip 5. Why do people spend money? There are 2 reasons. This is the first of the 2. They spend money on virtual goods, not because they're pretty pixels, but because of what it says about themselves when they show their friends. So if you're buying virtual goods in your game, you better make sure that it's showing off that player's creativity, that player's skill, that player's ability to collect everything, all of those reward behaviors we were talking about. Give them a social value, social capital if you like, for participating in your game, and they will spend money on things that show off that ability. Time versus money is the other reason people spend money. So I talked about those 90%-ish of people who invest their time in your game. Well, actually, a lot of them get to the point in playing where they'd much rather hand over 59p here, 10p there, £15 there, because it enhances their gameplay experience and allows them to get into the meat of the game without having to grind. A lot of players like grinding. They like to go and play the low levels again and again and again. Personally, I don't have the time, although I do enjoy it. I'd much rather spend another 59p to skip the grind and go on to the next area. But then I'm an explorer, so I would do that. But each of the games will have different reasons why you can help that player exchange his time for his money. But really importantly, if you are a game designer out there, don't let the time versus money break the game. It's so easy to get this wrong and destroy your game experience, because if you can compete with other people simply out of your pocket, it's no longer a game, it's an auction. Consumable goods is a way of spending money. And again, you'll probably notice that everything I'm talking about is about the freemium model. And the reason I talk about that is because I strongly believe that there's about 10 games in the world that can maintain being premium long run. And it's things like Call of Duty, things like Angry Birds, where the brand is so strong that the level of trust is there that I can pay in advance for the gate ticket. It's like choosing the right club to go to. There are only a few clubs where you're willing to pay the money up front. But for those others, for those freemium games, we have to be smarter about the way we monetize, because we want to make sure that everybody who plays our game can be addressed. And there's a simple term in economics called price elasticity of demand. I have no idea how that will translate, so I apologize if that doesn't translate well. But price elasticity of demand is the fundamental tool any game designer should be thinking about with freemium games, because it says that there's a whole bunch of people there who are willing to spend 5p, and I will make a return based on the number of people who are willing to spend 5p. If that's my only price point, that's all I'll ever make. But if I have a consumable good which allows people to purchase again and again and again, because if you remember, we wanted them to come back again and again and again. Now we have the ability to put the price at the level that that player values your game. And a combination of price points, a combination of goods that creates a richer experience will create a better revenue. But more importantly, do it right and it creates a better game. Better game is actually more important than possibly some people reckon. with freemium games. This is not a free game. We're not talking about putting our games out and just creating it just because people want to have a free, fun time. We actually want to generate games that generate revenue, that generate interest. We are not going to maintain that interest if we don't create the best possible game we can. The way to do that, I think, is to use all of the techniques in our armory of game design. And personally, this is one of my favorites. Scissor, paper, stone. Making everything a choice, a meaningful choice, rather than just, if I do this and then that, I will get the top score. Make some ambiguity in how you get to the top score. A great example for me was a game that we saw on PlayStation Home, where you got engine parts for a Wipeout style racing game. But the engine parts work best in different combinations. And those different combinations work differently for different players, depending on their style of play. So there was no clear answer of which was the best choice. So you had to, well, you wanted to, buy lots of different pieces to try and experiment, and that obviously meant you spent more money. You didn't just buy the top engine, the top stabilizer, or whatever else. So thinking about that ambiguity is a really powerful game design tool. And the nice thing is, particularly in the context of a freemium game, is that if you can build that into the virtual goods model, you've got a fantastic way of encouraging people to experiment and try new goods. So there's another technique that I think is worth thinking about. And by the way, not every game can use all of these things. It's only appropriate for some games and not for others. But this is, I think, a really interesting talking point regarding mobile. Particularly because if you are creating a game on a mobile device, like an iPhone or an Android phone, there is a mode of use. There is a particular way of experiencing content that the form factor, the nature of the device, the other things that you do with that device, that kind of forms a mode that you fit into. And breaking you out of that mode to do something else is very difficult. And very few games manage to work across platform because they don't pay attention to the different modes of use of the device. So how do you get past that? Well, for me, it's about creating a continuity that's in the cloud, a continuity that's separate from the gameplay, that's beyond the gameplay, and I call that a metagame. There are other definitions for metagame, but I call that a metagame. And that could be as simple as playing your farm game and having other people visit it while you're not there. It could be as simple as having a daily challenge pop up, and you know that if you go back, something will have happened to your game that's helpful or maybe hindering, like your crops wither. It's a gameplay piece, true, but it also plays into the metagame idea too. So think not just about the game and the game sessions that the player plays through, but what happens when they're not there, and how do they collaborate and share between gameplay sessions in such a way that they'll go back. So the last tip. Once you've got your game out, it's not your game anymore. It's theirs. It's their experience that matters. It doesn't matter what you thought the game was. If they find that there are ways to play the game that is enjoyable for themselves, that maybe breaks your rule system, that doesn't matter. They've created an emergent experience. And that is an extremely exciting point, because that's the point where games take on something entirely different than you ever thought would happen. That's when people become to love those games with a deeper affection that you could ever hope. And the more, as a designer or as a developer, you think about that game experience as being the users, the easier it is for you to put in the tools to help them express themselves, to play the games they want to play with each other, and more importantly, to use your game as a way of sharing experiences with their friends. And so they're my 10 tips Obviously, feel free to ask me questions on it, but I'll just carry on a few steps. So, what next? Let's summarize what we've been saying in very short terms. The point of a social game is about creating discovery and retention and maximizing the opportunity for building revenue. And it doesn't matter what the game is. Every game can generate a better experience by thinking about what the relevance of social is to that game. But I'm not going to tell you that there's a hard and fast rule set that will make your game a better game, because every game has to interpret it for themselves, and that's the role of the game designer. I'd also say, let's think about the device in our pocket. It is the most social device because it's the thing we take with us everywhere. It's the thing that we use to communicate anyway. And now with the iPhone and the Android, it is truly an internet-enabled device, even if the Wi-Fi doesn't work for me very often. So, the other thing on that chart is probably worth just highlighting. Obviously, Papaya, we focus on social games. We focus on helping people get this communication going between game sessions. And quite uniquely, we allow people to use the social graph from our games as well. And that delivers revenues. To explain the chart, the right-hand side is the one I find fascinating. That's the amount of money one person spent on that game. So we've got a guy that spent nearly $2,500 in Treasure Fever alone. And I still can't believe this, but 24% of the people who played that game spent money, which I find amazing. It's not going to happen to every game. Don't think that's going to happen if you don't get your social design right. But obviously, get your social design right, and these kind of numbers become possible. So that's it. Thank you. So for me, I want to make sure that you guys leave here with some real information about what makes social games work and why. There's nothing rocket science about my slides. I know most of you will have seen most of it, but hopefully you'll have learned at least how these things fit together and why some of these methods work. And I'd be delighted to hear any questions and any comments you guys have. Sorry.
Thank you for interesting information. And I have a question. When we speak about social games on mobile device, iPhone, Android, and maybe something else, where we haven't by default any social network, what way do you prefer? Create own social network, or maybe ask user to connect to exist social network, or maybe some else?
It's a very good question. Obviously, I'm biased, so I'll own up to that now. Clearly, the obvious answer is come and join us in Papaya. But being less flippant, the point is you need an experience, a social experience that matches your game player's behavior. If you go down the Facebook piece, it's a little bit still, even with the improvements, it's still a little disjointed. And for me, I don't necessarily want my boss, who's on my Facebook, my mum, my wife, my daughter, my friends from work to see me playing my Sim Social. Actually, for me, it's okay because it's research. But for a lot of people I know, that's a bad thing. So I like a more closed network, such as Papaya. Now that's why I like that, because when I do my updates, it's the people I have a shared games experience with, not just a random group of people who I'm friends with in different ways. So it's a good question. There is no real easy answer. You could use existing social networks, but not all of them are as good as each other in terms of gameplay experience, and basically find what works for you.
Thank you very much, Oscar. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and switch speakers again. Give me a few